Hello everyone and welcome to Aim High, the Nature First, Curiosity Powered online school where our mission is to make world-class live learning accessible to everyone. I'm Matthew Shribman, I'm the head teacher at Aim High and I am speaking to you from Portugal. And I am sorry about the late start. We had to switch to one of the reserve internet connections. You know what they say, always carry around a spare internet in your pocket. But anyway, hopefully this should be working, but do hello in the chat if you are joining us, and welcome all. So this lesson is called Where Do Viruses Come From? But before we talk about viruses, we're going to play a game, and the game goes a little bit like this. Hi to a shore. So the game goes like this. What are we looking at here? What is this? Now obviously this is a picture, but it's got loads of bits removed. Hi Claire, nice to see you. So yeah, there's a picture, but it's got loads of bits removed. What is it? Can anyone guess what it is? And if anyone guesses what it is first time, I'll actually be a little bit upset because I was trying to make it quite hard to guess. What are we looking at here? Give people a few moments to... Oh my God, is it really that obvious that it's the Sydney Opera House? Or is Whit R? Okay, Whit R, great answer that it's the Sydney Opera House. It is. GG Hall 35 has also got... Oh my God, is it really that obvious? I tried to make it a bit harder. I thought that as we went into this one, it would still be like a bit of a teaser. And even at this stage, I was wondering if people might get it or not. I've obviously seriously underestimated the ability of people to just figure out. It's the point. It is the point. It's really recognizable. Anyway, right. Let's jump into why we started with this. So yes, it is the Sydney Opera House. The reason why we started with this is because even though this isn't directly related to viruses to begin with, I kind of wanted to start with this little bit, which is about memory. So let's go back to this version here where we couldn't really see everything. Now, this is kind of how our minds store memories. So instead of storing like a full memory, what our minds do is they kind of store fragments of memories. So these, let's think of these as like the fragments of memories that make up our kind of picture of the Sydney Opera House, and then we kind of imagine the rest. And this is our way of our mind being kind of more efficient with memories. And these things have a name, and we call them engrams. Which I think is kind of a beautiful name. So engrams are like these kind of fragments of memory. Now, the really interesting thing about engrams is that every time you recover a memory, so if this was all you remembered of the Sydney Opera House, then every time you recover a memory, it's actually quite a creative process. So you then imagine all the gaps. So you fill in all of this stuff with your imagination. And then what your brain does is it then restores this new memory, even though loads of it you've just constructed by yourself. So, for example, if you happened to kind of like remember the Sydney Opera House and you remember that it's like kind of this shape kind of thing, I'll just like fill it in, blah, 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 whatever. But you kind of remembered that it had a top hat on, like a giant top hat here. Then you would store that in your memory, and then next time you try to recover that memory, you'd find that you'd have like an engram of like a bit of a top hat, and then you'd be like, I don't remember the Sydney Opera House having a top hat, but actually I kind of do. Anyway, yeah, so memory is kind of like quite a creative process, and a lot of what you remember is to do with these engrams that you have stored. Now, I don't want to linger too much on memory, even though memory is like a super interesting topic, but it's kind of what I've spoken about before. But actually, some elements in this lesson are some that I've covered a little bit before, but they've got a twist, and so hopefully those who've seen bits of these before will enjoy those bits anyway. So what I wanted to talk to you about next is that we store memories in our minds as proteins. Now, we don't understand memory entirely yet. Like memory, we think could have lots of different factors, but something that's quite a recent discovery is that it's to do with us storing proteins. So it's not just entirely about electric waves inside our brains, which is how we used to think it was. We're now discovering that it's not quite like that. Anyway, rather than just rambling on about memory and electric waves and proteins, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you this worm. So this is one of my favourite worms. Does anyone know what this worm is called? What type of worm this is? Let's give this worm a monocle. That'll actually come in handy in a moment. Does anyone know what kind of worm this is? I'll start writing it. Begins with plan. Clearly, well, maybe you guys know this, but if you don't, then maybe it's just because I'm overly enthusiastic about this kind of worm. Anyway, yeah, it's called a planarian worm. That's what it is. So the planarian worm, you can kind of teach some stuff. You can teach it some stuff. So it's only a little worm, so you can't really teach it a huge amount. Does this worm swim? I actually don't know if this worm swims. I think this worm that hangs out on land. Good question, but I think I think it hangs out on land, but I don't know for sure. But anyway, what you can do, you can take the planarian worm's kind of living chambers and you can split it up into an area that's really dark and an area that's really light. And then what you can do is you can store loads of the food in one of these. So you can just like have all the food in the dark area. This is the delicious food. This is jam. And let's say that this is a tiny crumb of biscuit or something. Anyway, there's loads of food in the dark area. And so what will happen is eventually this planarian worm and others, if you've got other worms about, will learn that they head towards darkness to get food. And this is a memory that gets like properly stored inside their minds. It's difficult to imagine what the mind of a planarian worm might be like, but ultimately it is kind of a mind in some ways. Anyway, so what do you think happens next? So I'm going to tell you the story of what we're going to do to this planarian worm, and then I want you to tell me what you think happens. So one of the strange and interesting things about these planarian worms is that you can cut them up into tiny pieces. Now I know that this sounds quite cruel, but just like bear with me. So we can cut the planarian worm up into loads and loads of little pieces like this, and every single piece that you cut will then do what? What do you think will happen to each piece? And what if we cut out the monocle piece as well and we put it over here? What will happen to that piece? Oh, it's on here. Hi, Kate. So the individual pieces will regrow into a fully sized worm, except for the eye piece. The eye piece won't. It's too what we call differentiated. So the cells already become so specialized that it can't then kind of stem off into all the cells required to make a new planarian worm. So that the eye cell unfortunately kind of gets left behind on this journey. But all the other bits will regrow into a full new worm, and now you'll have tens of planarian worms that will all have completely somehow remembered that they need to go to the darkness to find food. So yeah, Animal Josh is right as well. Yes, so these little pieces of worm will regenerate, and somehow they've remembered, even though they've kind of been cut. You can cut them into literally like the size of a cell, and they will still regenerate into a full worm that will somehow share the same memories. Okay, now you might be wondering why I'm still rambling on about memories and why we haven't started talking about viruses, and we will get there eventually. Here we go. So the next thing I wanted to talk to you about was memories, and it's about our nerve cells. So here are a couple of nerve cells just holding hands in our brains, or the brains of many different animals. And what we used to think is that in order for memories to kind of be transmitted between them, it was just a case of electrical signals firing. But now we've started to understand that actually, for memories to start to kind of transfer between nerve cells, there needs to be some transfer of proteins. Because now we understand that memory has more to do with proteins than we previously thought. So somehow we need to move some proteins from one nerve cell to another in order to share memories. Now, does anyone know how our body does this, or how our body learned to do this? How did we learn to transfer proteins from one place to another, from one nerve cell to another? Does anyone know the answer to that? While we wait, I'm flick over to the next bit actually to see if, but I'm kind of keen to see if anyone knows. But maybe not. I know there's always a little bit of a delay on these things. Right, we'll see if anyone says an answer, but meanwhile, I'm going to crack on. So here we go. Here's a virus. This is your kind of, I really like this shape of virus, but this shape of virus is actually a bacteriophage or bacteriophage. I never really understand how you're supposed to pronounce it. But a bacteriophage is a virus, but it's a virus that specifically infects bacteria. Because loads of all living things can get viruses. This is one of the amazing things about viruses. They kind of go everywhere. It's not just us or even other animals that get them. Even little bacteria can get them. So, classic question that you get asked in school: is a virus alive? Is this alive? What do you reckon? Is the virus alive? So Vesperin69 is saying yes, maybe. Does anyone else have any other thoughts on whether this virus is alive? Is it not? Okay, GG35 is saying yes and no. Right, so the classic thing that you normally get in school is you go through this thing called Mrs. Gren. Or Mrs. Nerg, if you say it differently. And so you check against this checklist, right? You say, does it move? Can it move itself? And the answer for a virus is no. And does it respire? Nope. Does it have sensitivity? Kind of, because it knows when it lands on something and then it kind of ejects itself, so kind of. Does it grow? Nope, viruses don't grow. Does it reproduce? Kind of, but it can't really reproduce by itself, so not really. Does it excrete anything? Kind of, like it kind of excretes something. Anyway, basically it doesn't have all the characteristic signs of life. But anyway, I don't really like this Mrs. Gren thing, so I'm just going to get rid of it and tell you another way that's a much better way for defining whether something is alive or not. And it was invented by the same person who came up with Schrodinger's cat. So Schrödinger was the person who came up with it. And he said living things reduce the chaos inside themselves. And that's something that is only really true of living things. So I'm seeing that Ritas G has said technically no because it cannot reproduce on its own. Yes, great answer. Yeah, so you wouldn't mark it off as something that can reproduce by itself. But yes, so in most things in the universe, well, one of the fundamental laws of the universe is that chaos always increases. You might have heard this as the second law of thermodynamics if you've gone far enough in studying physics and things yet. But in a more basic sense, it's just this idea that in the universe, chaos always increases. It's just the way of the universe, I suppose. But living things somehow go against that. And yes, we have to create a lot of chaos outside ourselves in order to keep ourselves ordered. But basically, yes, and Vesperin69 is saying exactly, it's about entropy. So living counter counter the increase of entropy. So they don't have this increase in entropy inside themselves. They're constantly fighting against entropy. And essentially, that's what it means to be alive. Whereas a virus doesn't really do that. A virus is very, very simple. So all that a virus really is, let's go back to here, and we'll just get rid of these bits. All that a virus really is a protein coat. It's just got a protein coat all around itself, and then inside it, it contains some genetic information. And the genetic information does something. So it might be a virus that carries a disease, and that means that the protein coat will go and sit on top of a living cell, and it will inject, here we go, let's draw the virus down here, and it will then inject the virus inside the living cell, injects the genetic information inside the cell, and this genetic information will travel inside the cell and then start to cause havoc, because the genetic information just tells the cell, make more of the viruses. And so the cell makes more and more of them. Eventually the cell might explode and then spread loads of other viruses which will attack all the other cells and get those cells to just make more viruses. But where did these viruses come from? Where did they come from? And the answer is not always the same, but the answer is normally about the same. So let's think about the common cold virus. Where did it come from? Does anyone have any idea? What do you think? Now, while people are answering that, in fact, I'm just going to give you time to answer that. And maybe there won't be an answer, which is also fine. Okay. Peter G has put in a great answer saying, I always thought of viruses as a damaged byproduct of reproduction. And Jovian is saying a byproduct of host genetics. Yes, okay, so every single day, the cells inside our body are making loads and loads of proteins. We've got the nucleus inside, which is sending out commands all the time. It's sending out commands in terms of little bits of genetic material, which go out to your ribosomes, which are basically your little protein factories. And this little bit of genetic material just says, make this protein, we need it, because we need more green in your eye colors or something like that. Or we need more like nail, I don't know, why do nails keep growing all the time? But anyway, we need to create this protein in order to keep the body going. However, this process is fraught with errors. And all the time stuff is going wrong. All the time, like the nucleus puts out a bit of genetic information which isn't quite perfect. And most of the time, this just results in a useless protein being created that is then destroyed. And this happens every single day. Every day, there's so many proteins inside ourselves that are created by mistake that then get destroyed because they're just completely useless. But this happens enough times over and over again, and eventually you might get to a point where this little protein factory will form a protein coat just completely by accident, because it's happened, you've had so many accidents that eventually you have this perfect accident that creates a protein coat that then swallows up the same bit of genetic information that was used to create the protein in the first place, and somehow just by a total mistake creates a virus. So viruses come from us. Viruses are just a totally normal byproduct of living things just going about their living, and eventually, over loads and loads of mistakes that happen over and over and over again, eventually we create our own viruses. So viruses do come from us. Now, obviously, if you look at more dangerous viruses, they're more dangerous usually because they've come from some other living thing and they've done what's called cross the species gap. And this goes into a whole other kind of field that we're not going to talk about now, about how it's our unhealthily close relationship with animals and factory farming and so on that is ultimately the main reason why we get so many of these super deadly diseases occurring. But we're not going to go into that too much now. What I want to talk to you about more, because we've only got a really short period of time, is just the fact that these viruses are being created by living things themselves. They're a totally normal byproduct of normal reproduction just happening over and over again inside the cell, or just like creating new proteins inside the cells, eventually creating viruses. It's kind of like an unfortunate mistake. But is it always an unfortunate mistake? So this is the kind of big question, I suppose. Like, viruses come from us and they get created as these kind of statistical anomalies, but are they always a bad thing? What do you think? are viruses always bad? And Rita is asking, how does a virus then get the injector part to its blueprint? So you're right that you could accidentally, inside one of your own living cells, create a protein coat that swallows the same genetic code that makes the protein coat. But if it doesn't have the injector bit, then that's fine. So ultimately, your body could be creating loads of things that are really like viruses, but kind of inert and non-deadly because they don't have the injector bit, or they don't have the ability to escape the cell, or whatever it may be. So you need the mistake to happen over and over and over and over and over again. You need mistakes to happen over and over and over again before you get the perfect mistake that results in the virus. So, what do people think? Are viruses always a bad thing? Are they always a bad thing? And Kate is exactly right. Yeah, viruses are not always a bad thing. If all that a virus is a piece of genetic information that gets created by accident but has this ability to then inject itself into loads of different cells and replicate itself over and over again, in theory, you could also create viruses that could do a good thing. They could contain some piece of genetic information that we've never had before. Now, I'm going to go quickly to this and show you that this is what the same area of fruit and vegetables looks like if you are able to see the color red, or if you're not able to see the color red. Now, at some stage, that ability arrived in our evolution, and there are ways that we can use. Some people are unable to see the color red. They have a kind of red-green color blindness, and you might be one of those people watching now. And if so, I'd be really interested to know if these look the same, because I'm not sure this is a very perfect picture, because it's quite difficult to actually represent color blindness. But anyway, if we look at this side here, oops, that's not a very good color. If we look at the right-hand side here, then in theory, we can use viruses to take the genetic information that would allow someone to see red, and we can infect someone's eyes with these viruses. And these viruses can then infect that person's eyes with the ability to see red. Now, this technology actually kind of already exists, but it's under a lot of regulation, and I met someone once who was kind of involved with this, and they said that they get loads of emails from people being like, I don't care that it's illegal, please just inject me with a virus, I want to try out being able to see red, which is a totally reasonable thing for people to think. But it's so heavily regulated, and one of the reasons is that your body actually can become immune to the virus, and then you can get rid of all the genetic material and you're back to seeing what you saw before, and I suspect that that's maybe a factor, but I actually don't know fully about that. But the reason why I wanted to talk to you about viruses and their ability to inject us with some kind of genetic information is that this is where the ability to transfer proteins from one cell to another came from. This came from viruses. In other words, we were infected by viruses with the ability to remember things. And when I say we, I mean just living things commonly, because it's not just humans who have this ability to transfer proteins between cells. Of course, humans are not very different to many other animals. It's a big mistake that humans often make to think that we are, but we're not. Loads and loads of living things can do this same process, and it's because in the past we just got really, really fortunate, and one of our common ancestors just happens to get infected with this virus that allowed this information to be transferred from one nerve cell to another nerve cell, and so we were infected with this ability to retain this kind of engram based memory. So I'll probably stop there, but yes, Vesperin has made a really good comment saying mistakes drive evolution, and I just wanted to leave you with the thought that viruses are part of the living whole. Through randomness, they endow and they destroy. It's a sheer numbers game. Sometimes they may do something good, sometimes they may do something bad. But it's wrong of us to think of them as something that we just have to fight against, as if they're like this kind of infectious enemy that we just must use loads of cleaning products and so on to kind of push against. We have to accept that they are part of the living whole that we are a part of as well. We're all part of the same living system. And the only reason why humans would start getting hit with loads and loads of really bad viruses is because our relationship with the rest of the living natural world has become so imbalanced that through sheer randomness, through sheer numbers, through the natural processes that viruses go through, we are just more likely to end up with infections that are going to be dangerous for us. And the way to fix that is not necessarily more cleaning products and disposable plastic in the long run. The answer is to fix our relationship with nature. To be honest, disposable plastic in the short run is even not a great idea. Just in case you don't already know this, important thing to know is that reusable items, like normal plates and Tupperwares and so on, are completely fine in a pandemic as long as they're washed normally with soap. This idea that we have to use disposable plastic for everything is completely crazy, and it's destroying the world. So don't use plastic. But do also think about how great viruses can be if we have a good relationship with them. So thanks all for coming, and hope you enjoyed that. And I'm sorry that this was a little bit of a short one, but it's because we're in the middle of running the climate course at the moment. But do come along to the one next week. We'll be back again next Tuesday, and do check out the Aim High challenges. If you haven't checked out the Aim High challenges yet, then do so. I'm going to type in the link here, aimhigh.co, and then my N key isn't working, so there we go. That's the link. So thank you all for coming. I can see that my internet just dropped out briefly. Thank you all for coming, and we will see you next week. Goodbye. Oh, do follow our socials if you haven't already. That'd be great. And yeah, we'll see you next week. Farewell all. Goodbye.